welcome to everybody out in the virtual world who's tuning in. It is high noon on April 7th, and we are continuing our Impact Your World lunch series. Today, we have Patrick Coonan with us. I began to get to know Patrick a couple years ago. He is a resident of Goshen and was developing an idea for a public orchard that kind of grew out of some of his own interests and experiences. And he's gonna talk us through some of what that experience, some of what those experiences have been, and what his vision for this orchard is, as well as the fact that the orchard began to become a real entity last fall out at Abshire Park. I'm really excited to have anybody out there tuning in with us right now who is here, and I hope you're all well. I hope you are all doing the things that you need to do to remain well. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate that. And I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation with you all. And kind of during the presentation, if there are questions that come up, feel free to type them in the chat box. I can't actually see the chat with my view, but Aaron's going to help monitor that. Yep. And and keep us on track in case questions come up. Goshen Community Orchard. It's a concept that kind of evolved over the last few years and is still evolving and probably still will a couple years from now. But I thought I'd give a little bit of background and share a little bit about kind of who I am, where I come from, what my thinking was around this, and then kind of the vision that I'm hoping to achieve with it. And that I think Aaron and the Parks Department of Parks and Recreation are really on board with. So just starting off, this is a picture of the planting at Goshen Community Orchard that we did last November. And so you'll see, we didn't plan out the full planting of all the trees and plants, but this kind of gives you a sense of how the space is going to look. This is in Abshire Park in the northeast corner, which is just along the Pumpkin Vine Trail. So it's a nicely accessible space. If you all know where the sledding hill is out there, it's kind of directly in front of the sledding hill. Like if kids were to come down the sledding hill, they would end up not in the orchard, but kind of going in that direction. And so, yeah, that's a space that the city's agreed to carve out for us, and that Aaron was able to secure some funding to help us get some of those initial plantings in place. So just giving you a little background, I'm not actually from Goshen. I'm from Fort Wayne, but I lived in DC for many years, and that's where I met my wife, who she works as vice president for enrollment and marketing at Goshen College now. So she had gone to Goshen and knew the community, and we decided to move back here after we got married. We actually got married in Goshen at Red Tail Farm, but then decided to move back here to be closer to family, and because we just, after visiting here, I felt like Goshen was such a cool place. And before I left DC, I started reading a lot. I'm kind of an amateur home brewer, so I experimented with that in the past and still do sometimes, but then got into cider making kind of fermented ciders, and just started appreciating apples at a new level, because there's like a whole renewal movement of old orchards that are like bringing back old apple varieties, from the old Americas that Thomas Jefferson and others were growing long ago and popularizing them again. And so I got to taste some of these old school apples, and it really blew my mind. I was tasting things that I didn't think apples could taste like, and experiencing flavors that I didn't think would come from that kind of fruit. So it was a discovery experience for me, kind of biting into my first American Golden Russet apple, which is just like an amazing russet apple. And it opened my mind to things, to that there are a lot of possibilities out there. And so, you'll see on the top left, I've got a few books here that are kind of apple oriented or orchard oriented. But then at the same time, as I was kind of exploring these ideas of, it'd be great to move back to the Midwest and have a little orchard of my own, I was also working for an organization, and I still work in international development. I was working for an organization that would work with small farmers in different countries and try to help them build resilience to climate change. And so looking for strategies and approaches to kind of mitigate the changes that they were seeing, especially in really vulnerable areas like the Sahel regions of Africa, where, you're kind of don't get that much rain anyway, but now people are seeing historic droughts every year. And in some cases it's like live or die for people. And so really needing to adapt to that is important. And so this book in the front is from a guy up in, I can't remember if it's Vermont or New Hampshire, but a guy who has an experimental farm and looks at all kinds of permaculture practices that he's used to reinvigorate the land. And he came and talked at one of our events that we had. So I got to experience some of his thinking, and it got me thinking about permaculture and just kind of how food systems can help us to be more resilient as communities and be able to kind of, provide for ourselves as needed. Anyway, these were a lot of the things kind of I was reading about beforehand and got me really inspired when I came here to take up gardening and orcharding. And that's what I did. When I came here, I was really excited to put in a garden. I ended up not just with one garden, but with 3 gardens. So I kind of went a little overboard, but my wife has been okay with that. We got some food out of it, and that was nice. I built a raised bed garden, which you see on the right at the house we were renting at the time. Then I had a friend who was putting in a bunch of raised beds and gave me one. And then there was a small community orchard space down in the dam neighborhood around the hospital that I was able to get a little land in. And so I got to experiment a little bit. And I also experimented a little bit with growing mushrooms, edible mushrooms, and using those in cooking. And so, yeah, we had a harvest that first year, and it got me really excited about kind of doubling down and learning more and trying not just to learn gardening, but also to try to incorporate and learn about permaculture and how we're kind of building different plant systems. So another great thing that happened around this time, I was really looking to put the things I was reading about caring for fruit trees into practice. And I don't know if you all know John Shirk up in the Bristol area, but he had some land that he used to farm, over a decade ago. And that, he moved off that land, but he planted a lot of heirloom apple trees that were just sitting up there. And somebody bought the land, and John, appealed to this guy. He's like, "Oh, please don't cut these trees down. Take care of them." And the guy was like, "Well, can you take care of them? Like, I don't have time to take care of them." And John was like, "No, I don't have time." So he kind of reached out through networks, and Phil Metzler came to me and said, "Hey, do you have any interest in taking care of this heirloom orchard up in Bristol?" And I was like, "Yes," pounced on it. And so that gave me an opportunity to kind of experiment a little bit with growing or caring for and renovating fruiting trees. And then also experimenting with grafting a little bit. So I started playing around with the idea of grafting. I got excited about the idea that, I can make one tree that has 6, 7 different varieties of apples on it. That's amazing. So I, as you can see on the left, I was grafting, I grafted a few crabapple trees from friends of ours. And then I started, I bought some rootstock, and I'm like, well, let me try grafting my own trees, from scratch. So I purchased some rootstock and some Scion, and I started experimenting with grafting. And that first year was really successful. Grafting can be really intimidating because it's like, wait, what if I mess up? And in most cases, if you mess up, you just try again the next year. So the consequences aren't that great. But I think it's kind of intimidating, the idea of doing these things that we've never done before when we're amateurs and we're just kind of experimenting and learning. And kind of learning how easy it can be and how rewarding it can be. Say, oh, I grew this plant. Wow, it's going up, and it's going to be a new tree in 2 or 3 years, like a large tree. It's an exciting and invigorating thing. And I was like, well, it'd really be really great if we had a way to kind of spread that knowledge out through the community and build those skills in others. Another thing that, while I was living in the first house that we rented in DC, that I was noticing was when you go around town, there are all these fruiting plants everywhere, fruiting trees along trails, like the Winona Trail and Millrace and other places. And then I heard that, there's this guy, Aaron Sawatsky Kingsley, who's been planting all these out, the city forester, as a part of just kind of promoting edible landscaping through the community. And I got really excited about that. So I tried some urban foraging, and it also gave me an opportunity to discover new plants and, like service berries, June berries. These are some Juneberry trees that are right down at the end of the mill race next to the farmer's market and the power station in GBCO area. And yeah, I understandably, we don't just pick things off trees and try eating them, because that can be dangerous. But if we are able to gain that knowledge and skills, I think there's such a reward that we as individuals in the community can have in appreciating the things around us that can provide us with nutrition, and not just nutrition, but really delicious foods. So that got on my radar, and I started just kind of toying with ideas around, hey, how can I take this new interest and try to share this out in a broader way, in a more communal way? And looking, back, I started doing searches. I don't really remember how this happened, Aaron, but I came across some old post in some forum somewhere where you were talking about interviewing, an older member of our community who had kind of lamenting the fact that we used to have, everybody used to have a fruit tree. You'd go down the block and everybody'd have at least one fruit tree in their yard. And these days you don't really have that. And I thought, wow, that'd be really cool. Like, how do we get that back? That interest and knowledge of caring for fruiting plants and the appreciation of having them around, not just seeing them as a nuisance where fruit drops on the ground and, wasps come, or yellow jackets in the fall, but, being able to really make a plan and utilize that stuff in ways where, they can benefit us and we can discover new things, especially in ways where we don't have to, I think a lot of times the idea of fruiting plants is that it can take a lot of time and energy and knowledge to maintain them. But I was really interested in exploring things like the serviceberry, which doesn't require like hardly any maintenance aside from like annual, periodic pruning. So no spraying or anything like that. So with that, I reached out to Aaron and to Tanya over at the Parks Department and just started exploring this idea of setting up a community orchard. And I feel like one of those early steps wasn't just the idea, it was developing partnership. It was talking with folks in the city. It was talking with community members that, in my networks who I knew had similar interests, and trying to get a rounded out idea of what this thing could look like. And so we started talking about, what it could be. We started talking about where it could be located, and the Parks Department has been really supportive and just opening up a space for that. And so eventually we ended up choosing Absher Park as the site. It took us a little while to get there, and not only that, was it choosing the site, but I think we found a really great spot. But it was also, the city, to me, this is like a shared vision that's emerging. I brought my vision to it, but others are weighing in and kind of transforming that. And the city has been really instrumental in making this happen. So Aaron put in for a grant, to help fund the initial planting of the orchard, and some permanent structures there, like a little fence that could go around it, protections for plants, water hookup, those kind of things. And, was successful in that. And so that things are really moving forward quickly because of, just the hard work that he's put in. I see this as a shared vision. So I really appreciate the city's partnership and ownership of this. So this is the initial design that I wouldn't say the initial design. This is the 50th iteration of the design that I put together. And just to kind of get us kicked off, I know there's a lot of things in small letters here, but I'm curious, and you can type this in the chat, what are some things that you envision, or plants that you envision when you hear the word community orchard? What are the kind of things that you envision going in that orchard, or that you expect to see when you go in there? Could you type that in the chat? And just curious what people come up with.
I'm seeing apples, peaches, hazelnuts, here comes serviceberries, blueberries, black currants, keep them coming, cherries, fruiting canes.
Great. Yeah.
Pawpaw, walnut, blackberries.
Yeah, excellent.
Chicago hardy fig.
Yeah, a lot of these things that I'm hearing have gone into the plan. And part of what I was thinking, so, obviously I've got a little bit of a bias because
Marco Stolzfus says mango, please.
Yeah, right. I've got a little bit of a bias towards apples, but I was like, no, that's not what I want this to be. Apples can be really hard to take care of. We've got a few that we're planning out because I do want that to be a piece of discovery, you know, because I feel like apples can be more than what you just find in the supermarket. But I was really looking for, when I developed this design and listened to people and, you know, people were sharing with me, I was looking things that would do well in our zone. I was looking for things that could largely be kind of, don't need that much maintenance. And I was also looking for things that would be easy to propagate and grow and that people would be able to pick from. So not something that's going to grow so big that you always need a ladder for it. Especially, you know, if we can find a dwarfing or a variety that's a little smaller and more compact that we could plant out there that would do pretty well, that we try to get that out there because it'll bring the fruit right down to the people that are walking around it. Another idea that I had for this site is that it's not just a showcase for fruit. It's a place that's functional. It's a place where people, you know, like it's walkable. It's a place where you'd go and you'd want to like park up somewhere in some corner of the community orchard and have lunch or something like that. So I really wanted it to be a space where it felt like, you know, we could go in there. It was inviting, it was drawing people in, and it was usable. It was kind of it could be a gathering point. And so I tried to design it in a way where it, you know, kind of has that kind of layout. So yeah, many of the things you mentioned are going to go in here. Just gotta go back to my slides. There we go. No. Okay, I guess we already did this question. So some of the things going in there, nut crops. So hazelnuts were mentioned, yes. I was also thinking chestnuts. Even though they can get quite large, they could be pruned for compactness. Northern pecans sound awesome. They get huge, but I think in the perimeter of the orchard, they could do really well. So it'd be really nice to move some of them in there. And it gives us a sense of, you know, what are some low maintenance nut crops that we can grow in the north. There are already a bunch of black walnuts around there, so that'll also be incorporated, but those are everywhere. So I wanted some things that were kind of unique and interesting and that people could discover walking through. And this is not a definitive list. So this is stuff that can change, be added to, morph over time, but just gives you a sense of what types of things we were thinking to include there. So yes, we have some traditional fruiting trees like apples, pears, and plums. And I'm especially looking towards like plum varieties or pear varieties that are kind of low maintenance. An Oikos nursery out of Kalamazoo has a bunch of selections that are, you know, kind of low maintenance, no touch, you know, that still produce decent fruit, albeit small. And so we're thinking to incorporate some of those varieties, including stuff like beach plums, which are kind of native to these places. And maybe they're mostly pit, but still they're very easy to maintain and they're very compact, relatively speaking. Other plants that we're looking to incorporate though are, you know, stuff that people might not be as familiar with. So like Juneberries and serviceberries, pawpaws, American persimmon trees. And we tossed in a couple of Causa dogwood. That's mostly my influence because I have a Causa dogwood growing in front of my house here. And so there's always seedlings coming up and it produces really nice edible fruit every year. I was surprised how tasty it can be. And so I thought that could be, you know, not just a nice ornamental plant, but also an interesting fruiting shrub that people could discover. We also have fruiting shrubs. So I heard blueberry mentioned, blackcurrant. We'll have a few different currant varieties. They're really easy to incorporate and also to start. All you have to do is take a cutting of a currant, stick it in the ground in the fall, and it'll be a new plant in a year. So they're really easy to make into new plants. Gooseberries, elderberry. Elderberries you can't just like pick them and eat them. But so we've kind of put those around the perimeter, but I feel like they're such a superfood. Those along with aronia and honeyberries, which maybe, or and sea berries, which not as many people are maybe as familiar with, but I felt they're worth incorporating into the orchard. Sea berry is a really interesting one that I had never heard of, but I came across through my permaculture readings, and it's the most northern hardy fruiting shrub in the world, as far as I'm aware. And it produces bright orange berries, these bushes with bright orange berries, and they're very tart and tropical flavored. They're not very sweet, but you can blend them with a sweeter juice. But I thought they could be like a really interesting piece of discovery to incorporate into the orchard. They're also really interesting and beautiful plants. And then honeyberries are, for those who aren't familiar, are kind of like blueberries in their flavor, but you know, in their shape, in their habit, they're like smaller 5, 6 feet, 4 feet shrubs. But they don't need acidic soil, and they're very cold hardy. And I thought they'd be really interesting to incorporate as well as a piece of discovery. Vines and canes. So yeah, hardy kiwi, grape, raspberry and blackberry. People mentioned figs, and we have an order in for cold hardy figs, so we're going to throw in a couple of those too. So yeah, it's a mix of different things. This isn't a definitive framework. I feel like this is a starting point, and the map, the design that we have here is a starting point. But this is kind of the design where it's starting, and then I think there's a lot we can incorporate from a permaculture perspective around that in terms of nitrogen fixing plants and other beneficial plants that can be woven in. And I'd like to, for this to be all filtered through me, but for this to be more of a dispersed model where people are kind of taking ownership of different sections of the orchard, different fruit guilds, building different fruit, guilds around certain trees or plants that are out in the orchard. So orchards change over time. Even, established orchards, old trees, some trees die and you put new ones in, you sometimes do things a little differently. And I definitely see this as a living process. So we saw this earlier on. This is the original planting, and we've done a first planting. One of the challenges we're kind of facing right now is with the COVID-19 stuff going around, when a plant order in, how do we get, what plants are we able to get out and keep alive throughout this summer until we can really get a volunteer contingent out there to do more work. And so that's something we're just trying to figure out. We've got a couple plans that we're pulling together, but our plan is to kind of do another planting this spring and then to keep adding over time. But the big ones are like last fall and then this spring, hopefully. So yeah, just kind of thinking through just the development of the orchard idea or concept and kind of the phases of orchard development. I see it as 3 things. So if we talked about setting down the roots, so that's like looking at the partnerships, with the city, with folks who have provided some initial funding, with developing like a volunteer contingent, developing the design and doing the planting. I feel like that's always, just get it out there, let the trees start to develop and establish, and then we'll be able to do more with it down the road. But this is more, for me, my vision, this is more than just planting trees. This is creating a space for discovery and for learning. So it's creating a space that's inviting, that people, like I said earlier, can walk through. Maybe you would want to come and picnic. Maybe you go and you have, you're having a small outdoor concert there. It's a space that draws people in and is a bit of a gathering space, but also a place for learning. So people can come, pick some fruit, try something new, hopefully discover something that they're really interested in, saying, hey, I might want to grow this at home. But we also use that as an opportunity to engage people to learn how to care for the plant. And so people could come and we'd have volunteer kind of sessions where people are practicing, learning new skills in caring for plants, fruiting and nut plants, and also sharing that with others. And finally, like kind of as we kind of move forward, it's not just about the orchard itself for me. For me, it's about building a resilient community. So the orchard to me is like a hub, but I could see us having a community where we have satellites all over town. So we could have parks with little clusters of fruiting and nut crops or whatever, kind of spaced in different places. And we could also be having, be sharing things out with folks, new plants from cuttings or from grafts that people could then grow at their house. And I think with the orchard itself, it gives us a lot of material that we could potentially propagate into new plants, either through cuttings or whatnot. Aaron has actually already agreed to giving us a little bit of space in the city nursery where we could, stick a bunch of cuttings in the ground and then do a giveaway every year, of currant bushes or honeyberries or other things. And we could probably, do a similar thing with grafted trees or vines. And so I feel like this can be a point of dissemination of plants throughout our community. And it could also, to me, that whole communal aspect is really important too. The part of the growth is not just like planting out fruit trees. It's not about expanding fruit trees. It's about deepening our sense of community with one another. So I feel like, especially nowadays, I mean, we live in very politically divided times, right? But when I was thinking about this, I'm like, well, I feel like this is something that brings people together across the political spectrum. And maybe what we need to do is kind of break down our silos with one another. And maybe something like a community orchard can be a space one of the spaces that can help to do something about that. It can bring people together that wouldn't necessarily congregate and get to know each other, and it can help build story, telling and connections, and help people learn from one another. And we can also do things like harvest days for certain things, or processing, classes where we're processing things like making elderberry juice or other things that people could then learn how to do themselves. And so I see a whole, kind of outward focus to the later phases of this, that we'd be moving into after the plants get mature enough for us to be able to really start, like bringing people in to help with them, and then kind of taking that out to new places. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of where I was thinking to go with the orchard. To me, it's not something that needs to be fixed or set, and I really want it to be a collaborative space. So I'm really eager for folks who are interested in getting involved. We've got a Facebook group where we're starting to develop a sense, of connection with each other. But I think, after this initial planting, I think, having people who are interested in helping with some of the more detailed parts of the design in different, areas of the orchard, the permaculture pieces, building in companion plants and stuff like that, nitrogen fixers and nutrient accumulators and those things, and pollinator attractors, and incorporating other fruiting plants, I think is going to be really key. So to me, it's like an evolving thing, and I'd really love others to participate as well. So yeah, that's in a nutshell kind of background on where this vision or this idea came from. Open to any questions people might have or comments.
Patrick, sorry. Go ahead, Teresa.
I had a question for you. So when you look at the drawing of the orchard, it seems like things can be kind of close together. Are you going to have to trim those to keep them at a certain height so that they can all coexist in that group, or are they going to be pretty much maturing at their maximum size?
For some of these trees, like the outlying trees especially, I kind of planned it for their maximum growth size. So kind of what they would mature to over many, many years. For some of the internal stuff, we tried to choose either dwarf varieties. So for the service berries, it was like a shrub service berry. So really, like, that is the size that those trees would get, if we're using that variety. Same with the blueberries and the honeyberries and those things. Those are all accurate. I think the apples could get bigger if they're not pruned, and the chestnuts, I think I did that pretty accurate to size too. So yeah, I really tried to account for what the maximum size of the plant would be over time. And I think, in the near term, especially, some of these plants are really slow growing, like the Korean pine nut, very slow growing. So it's not going to occupy that space that we've carved out for it for many years. And so a lot of other things could kind of go in the middle in the interim. That's space where we could plant out currants or other understoring fruiting shrubs, or other like beneficial plants. So I feel like there's a lot of flexibility in the short term to fill in some of those spaces as the orchard matures into kind of what we see here.
Thanks.
Patrick, let's see. I had one question in here about the Facebook group. It looks like Marco Stolzfus has chimed in on chat with that. So Joey, you were the one who asked about the Facebook group. So check it out on chat there, the link. And then Kathleen was asking, I'm curious, based on your initial plans, what is the range of months when a few / some / all of the plants are producing fruit?
Ooh, well, the fruiting shrubs will be a lot sooner. So I feel like even like the currants could be a year from when that first year they're planted, even in some cases. That might also be true with like raspberries and other cane plants. The trees, it depends on how old they are, but I'd say, we're probably looking at 2 to 3 years minimum for most of the trees that are planted out there to start bearing fruit. I think like the bush cherries, for example, are 3 years. So yeah, probably you're looking for anywhere from 1 to 5 years. I feel like we'd really start to be hitting a stride in 5 years with many of these things. 5 or 6 where the larger ones are starting to come into production. Because most of these are not like full-size standard trees. They're like slightly dwarfing rootstock that tends to be more precocious, so tends to produce at an earlier age. So yeah, it is definitely something that would take probably a couple years to start hitting a stride though. And so right now it's kind of like setting the infrastructure in place, and then you're really hopefully going to be drawing people in larger numbers, 2 to 3 years down the road.
So first, a comment here. Somebody suggesting that there be an asparagus bed and an herb garden incorporated. That sounds fun. That'd be great. And then Cindy Hartzler has this comment here. I wonder how many fruiting trees in Goshen are located on properties where they're being neglected. Could part of the outreach involve mapping out the entire city's fruit tree canopy? That's a really interesting idea. And of course, that goes beyond the orchard work, but it does kind of then point to your idea, Patrick, about how the orchard becomes a point of dissemination into the rest of the community, and so maybe part of that work then does involve how do we become aware of what's already growing, what's already in existence within the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know that it was either the Community Resilience Guild or Transition Goshen did a little bit of a mapping a few years ago of many of the fruiting trees. There's probably like some work that could be done, to the extent people want to work on that to improve on that, because it's hard to like really sort it by variety or try to understand like when is it ripening, or even within a variety, there's a lot of crab apples and other things on there, so it can be hard to filter. But I think, I think that's a really great idea. I'd love to see more utilization. Actually, on one hand, I like to have a lot that I can forage, so I don't want anybody stealing from my Juneberry trees. But no, I think
me.
Yeah, but I think most of the time it just sits there and the birds get it, or it falls and rots. We need to be utilizing the stuff that's out there more, and I feel like I would love to see more of that happening.
So part of what's interesting about your particular presentation, Patrick, is that we are in this moment where we are thinking about food security issues as the pandemic winds its way through our society, through our culture. Food security issues are being exposed. Some of our vulnerabilities, some of the gaps in our systems are being exposed. And so part of what you're presenting here is one of the remedies to some of those vulnerabilities. Let's see. So a question here, which fits right in, is there any thought about sharing Scion Wood and other easily propagated species, caneberries, with the community? And as you answer that, why don't you explain what Scion Wood is for those who don't know?
Sure. Yeah, Scion Wood is when you have a tree that is kind of approaching maturity. There'll be often, like if you have an apple tree and you have a branch growing out, you'll have a new shoot that comes up off of it. And that can be cut back in the winter as Scion Wood. And then you take that, like hopefully it's about the width of a pencil and, at least 8 to 12 inches long or something like that. You can take that first year wood and you can graft it onto a new branch of a different tree and it will produce that original variety. Or you can graft it onto some rootstock and it'll start a new tree of that variety. So yeah, anytime you have any kind of apple that's a named variety, you never have anything that's planted from seed. That tree that it came from was not planted from seed. It was a grafted tree. So somebody had taken a Scion Wood from, or a bud from a different Red Delicious tree or a different Cortland tree, and they had grafted it to a rootstock or something else in order to produce that tree that produces Cortland apples. And so, yeah, Scion Wood, I think I would love to have some Scion exchange going on in our community. I think it's more a matter of interest and people having, the interest, the interest level. I think as the interest goes up, I would love to be involved in something like that because I really get excited about grafting, and that's a skill that I'd like to pass on to others as well.
Let's see, a comment that maybe there could be some working groups to help identify existing fruiting trees. That's an interesting idea. That would be a nice dovetail to our Canopy Goal project. That's something that's an idea that we should carry forward. Question here, who has access to the food that the orchard produces? Would there be some central body that harvests crops if no one else does?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think my thinking was it would be really awesome if this could be a space where, just anybody walking through it, if a given fruit is ripe, that they could be allowed to pick a reasonable amount of it, right? So obviously we'd want to spread that out as much as possible. We'd want to have it as a place for discovery. We wouldn't want somebody coming in and just picking a tree clean for themselves and their family, like really kind of spreading it out. But also, we don't want people picking fruit too early or when it's not ripe or whatever. So I was thinking, we could have something where, we have a contingent of volunteers who are caring for trees. When it's ripe and ready to pick, we put up a sign or something like that saying, hey, this is ready, feel free to pick it and try it, and then kind of give some guidance around quantity. But that, it should be, as a place of discovery, it should be something where you can go through, and if there's like 2 or 3 different bushes that have ripe stuff, you can try some. You can grab a handful or get a little bit to try yourself, but without like draining the resources from everybody else. At the same time, I think some of the fruit is stuff that needs to be processed. And so having some education around that, or even like having a harvest day, like say for the apples, we're going to have a harvest day and we're going to press it into cider. That's what the Bloomington Community Orchard does. They have a cider pressing day every year. But events like that would be really great too. So there could be both that combination of, for some things, pick a handful of honeyberries and, try them out, to like apples, where you have a whole group of people who are coming together for a picking day. And I think we could indicate that through signage and just make it something that's an inviting space and where we're really honoring that idea of discovery and learning.
Patrick, and part of the advantage that we see in this location at Abshire Park is that the Abshire cabin, just right next to it, is equipped with a kitchen. And so the capacity to do some educating about the actual fruits and nuts and berries, the foods, but also about preservation, right, and processing. That's part of the idea, part of the vision.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yep. It's that educational piece, because I feel like that component of, even if a lot of times, even if we have fruit trees or our neighbors have fruit trees, people don't always have the time or the knowledge to know what to do with it. And, maybe it's not even, you have a fruit tree, you have to process that food, but maybe it's like, there's a group of people in Goshen who are, you might not have time to pick your tree, but we're interested in going around to the 6 or 7 households that have trees that are unpicked and collecting all the apples and making it into cider. And then we'll share some back with you, So, there could be it could be a component, like a coordination piece where we do some educating for those who want to know, and then there's kind of a coordination piece so that we're better utilizing those resources that we have. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the mapping thing too, like knowing who has fruit, who's planning to use it, who's not, and for those that aren't, trying to connect them with people who can use it.
Patrick, so for people who are interested in this orchard, or maybe interested in some of these larger ideas around the orchard or around fruit production in the city, is the best way to get in touch with with the orchard project through the Facebook page? Is that the best way for folks to get involved? I mean, they can certainly get
Yeah. So
me, but
yes, go through the Facebook group. It's a private group, but if you know somebody in there, they can add you, or you can just request to be added, and we'll add you. I think what I'll do as a next step here is put out a survey to folks who are part of that group in about a week or so, and just get a sense of different ways you'd be interested in being involved. Sounds like there's a really, kind of a whole foraging component that's kind of like an interest in that's coming up here. And so I could see some coordination around that being one of the possible things that we work on. But yeah, it's also like those steps for getting the orchard in place. So as I said, like we're still struggling with kind of envisioning how, obviously we can't do a volunteer day because of the COVID-19 stuff. So we're trying to envision what it means to engage volunteers in the era of COVID-19 and how people could get involved sooner rather than later. But it's definitely something I think we want to tap into. The Facebook group is a private group because I didn't want to have like random people from, a million miles away or trolls joining the group. I really wanted to keep it at a community space and a space where, people can feel like they can share and that they're sharing internally with a group from Goshen. So it's not that I'm monitoring, I'm like, oh, you can't join and you can. I'm not kind of doing that kind of nitpickiness. It's more that I kind of feel like it creates a sense that we have this space for just us, that we can talk about the orchard stuff, and where, we're not on display for people far away who might have bad intents. So
the Department of Environmental Resilience can also be a place you can contact us, and we can help to get connected to the orchard project too. That's through my email address, for instance, Aaron Kingsley, one word, at goshencity.com. You can also look it up on the city website, the City of Goshen website. Let's see.
To Evan's question. I saw Evan's question about the community cider press. There was a community cider press that was bought. Phil Metzler is kind of the holder of that. It's got I think some people have complained that the yield isn't as high as they would have liked, but it is there and it's a community resource. So that's something that you should, if people are interested in using it, you should contact Phil or the Community Resilience Guild directly, and I'm sure he'd be very happy to lend it out and let people use it.
Yeah. Hey, Patrick, I also wanted to just touch on the role that Luke Gosho played, and also Memorial High School over in Elkhart. Both of them played some important roles in the energy that kind of built around this idea. Luke, with his vast knowledge of orcharding and food foresting, and Elkhart Memorial High School 9th grade students, via the Horizon Education Alliance, got in touch with us about this emerging project, and about 60 9th grade students a year ago worked at kind of researching different plants, different trees, and also just kind of imagining what this space should be like. And one of the really impressive takeaways from that experience with those high school students is how many of them named the idea that an orchard like this should be a safe and welcoming place, which is exactly one of the principles that you've designed for. So I think those are some interesting things for us just to remember here also.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. Also, I'm being reminded that this webinar will be posted on our website by Friday. So if anybody is interested, want to go back or want to tell somebody else, it'll be there by Friday. Also want to say that we will be doing another podcast next Tuesday. So watch for our website and also our Facebook to see how to sign up. not that we are shutting the conversation down right away, but I want to get those things out. Let's see. Are you seeing some questions come up there too, Patrick? Let's see.
Process of getting money from the enterprise. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So the question about the grant that we were awarded. So the grant came from the enterprise enterprise organization. That's like Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and technically it came through the Enterprise Foundation. That process actually began with the Arbor Day Foundation, who contacted us in the Parks Department before there was a Department of Environmental Resilience about a year and a half ago, looking for projects, and we were kind of coalescing this idea and pitched it to them, and the Arbor Day Foundation then pitched it to a series of corporate sponsors, and initially it was Bank of America who was interested in this. Didn't work out, and it seemed like the idea just kind of fizzled. But then in September of 2019, Enterprise contacted us and said that they were ready to go. And we had to really scramble then to kind of finish our plans and get something ready to go, so that in October we were able to begin putting the plants in. It was a $25,000 grant. It'll help us to pay for water infrastructure, which will come sometime this spring. We're not entirely sure exactly when in the spring, but water infrastructure will come. Some fencing will come, and of course more planting, as well as signage. I was reading some of the chats there with ideas about signage, so that's another important part of what we'll need to have. Yeah. Any other thoughts here? Either from you, Patrick, or folks who are watching?
I really appreciate everybody, tuning in. It's cool to see, a lot of interest in this. And yeah, really, like I said, I hope this is a shared, evolving vision, and that you all find a way to plug in and get involved and maybe own a little piece of this. Like I said, we did the initial planting. We're kind of planting in these bigger things, but there's a lot of other things that can go in there. Obviously, we're limited in space for large trees, but I think I would love to see kind of an adopt a tree guild model where different folks are kind of, okay, I'm going to take the Asian pear guild, and so like are kind of caring for and adding in new plants around that. That kind of complement the tree, or attracting pollinators, or accumulating nutrients for the benefit of the tree around it, and things like that. So if you're interested in getting involved in kind of owning a little piece of this and taking ownership of a guild, of like a plant guild in the orchard, let me know. Love to have you there, and please join our Facebook group. That's the best way to stay in touch. So thanks, everybody.
So let me just say thanks again to Patrick for making all of this information available to us. Thanks for all the energy you've put into this project so far. Thanks to all of you who were with us virtually this afternoon, this early afternoon. Thanks to Teresa Saylor for kind of running all the tech behind the scenes and making it work so nicely. Again, we'll have another webinar next Tuesday at noon, so keep your eyes open for that. Thanks so much for joining. Be well, be safe, give space, and slow down. Thanks.